Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gaines, I wanted to follow up with you on some of your comments. You had talked about the area of prevention and thinking about what we could do to complement the efforts you're doing in the industry. And you talked about, prevention investments maybe there could be benefits across industries. Can you describe that a little bit more?
Across the industry.
Across the industry.
Across the industry
Yes.
itself. And I do have to come back to this issue, and I know it's uncomfortable maybe to repeat it again, but we do have in the industry a set of standards, and those standards hold us to a level, and if we're not compliant, then there's liability. And I think that has to be looked at first, because there's not the lack of interest in wanting to be able to share from an industry, but there's certainly a level of hesitancy at times at what level we share. So I remind us of that. To that point, though, I don't think it can be done on a voluntary basis. I think that there has to be an open, collaborative environment between the government, and I speak of probably 2 or 3 agencies that I think we could all do a better job. And I start out with Homeland because they own the infrastructure. I start out with DOE because they are our sector control. Those are 2. The third would be the FBI because they become the investigative arm in the event that something happens. I do believe that there is a way with the industry to be able to collaborate real-time threat analysis information. And it isn't a voluntary, but rather a requirement that should occur. But it does start with the issue of our ability to be able to manage that directly, industry to government.
So it sounds to me like some of the effort, you're talking about people getting together in a room and meeting and discussing this. You aren't talking about major investments in infrastructure or some kind of technology. You are talking.
I am talking about both. I'm talking about the industry being able to have the necessary technology within their company to be able to provide that level of information. And I'm talking about the government being able to have and being a recipient and being able to use it. So it's technology and it's also skills and resources.
And do you think that when you think about prevention, you prevent one threat, but then another threat emerges that you weren't aware of? How long are the benefits from that kind of an investment? How long does that last?
I think that's one of the things Mrs. Lee talked about is that becomes a priority. Where do we focus on first? I don't think you can deal with every single threat. There's a lot of work that's being done in the industry right now to define what a critical asset is, and it's very good work. The gentleman asked me, are the standards good? They're really good. They create a baseline. I can tell you within our company what are, by definition, the critical substations that have an impact on our entire network. Now, if I start there just alone with those critical assets and you multiply that times 120 investor-owned utilities, that's pretty valuable information. And so, and again, I don't want to give you any idea how many that is, other than to say it is a manageable number.
Mm-hmm. And just, it was mentioned earlier, this idea of improving early detection. And I don't know if that was you, Mrs. Lee, or who it was that talked about the importance of that. Is that where we should be focusing?
I will add, I think early detection is important. One of the difficulties, and I believe it's been discussed here, is when you have an event, it can be very difficult to determine whether it's a cybersecurity event. I've done exercises with utilities, and their frustration was, I didn't know it was a cybersecurity event. So it's a matter of, and we talked about on the protection side, but also, as we've all discussed, you're using commercially available products. They have built-in vulnerabilities. The utilities are, as they're developing their mitigation strategies, you have to assume your systems at some point are going to be compromised. And so you take that as a given. It may be not significant, but you use that when you develop your mitigation strategy. So I think it's a combination of looking at it from the protection side, but then what do you do if there is a cybersecurity event? You want the electricity to continue to flow.
Mr. Wilhausen?
Yes, I would agree with that too, because I know there's been a lot of discussion about the standards out there, and that's fine, and they may be adequate. But what also needs to happen is the implementation of those standards consistently over time throughout the enterprise. And in our work at federal agencies and other entities, that often does not occur. Vulnerabilities exist because standards aren't being implemented consistently over time across the enterprise. And so it's through that attacks often occur. So the monitoring aspect of the effectiveness of the security controls is going to be also a key part of the overall defense and strategy, or defense in depth strategy.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.